My name is Dylan McElhatton, and I'm here with Halogen Systems. And today we're going to go into display diagnostics and how to see all of our measurement parameters to confirm that our sensor is functioning normally. So I've had this sensor running for a few minutes, so we have all of our measurement parameters here. Upon startup, of course, we're going to see the dashed lines for a little while. This is our default display configuration, other than connectivity showing instead of PSU. If you press the down arrow once, we're going to get some additional information here. And today I'm going to walk you through what this information is and what it means and how you can use it for diagnostics. This top value here, the -45, that's our raw signal in nanoamps. That is basically how we measure chlorine and calculate our chlorine value. This is a really good indicator of whether or not we are seeing chlorine. If you're seeing -45, however, your sensor is running in water that you expect to be higher than 1 ppm, this value should be significantly higher than 45, at least 1,000 nanoamps. If you see that, you know you might have an issue with sampling or a sensor issue as well. So that's a good number to know for measurement, as well as whether the sensor is operating correctly. The next value over is going to be our aux voltage. The aux voltage is a measure of basically how much current and voltage our sensor is using. This is also a good number to take a look at to determine whether or not our sensor is running dry. If our sensor is running dry, this aux voltage is either going to rail really high or go really negative. If it goes outside of 1900, 0 plus or minus 1900, you're going to start seeing an error 31. So aux voltage is really good to help you diagnose what's going on with the sensor, whether it's running an error. If you see this value jumping a lot, there's likely some air bubbles running within the system. This next value down here, next to the M, is our motor speed. Our set point for all of our non-hazardous standard sensors is 2200 RPM, or revolutions per minute. And then our set point for our explosion-proof sensors, our hazardous location sensors, is 1650. You'll see a little bit of variation from 2200 or from 1650 just as the sensor continues to update and we get small changes in our motor speed. If you see this value jumping a lot, that's probably another indicator that either your cover is on too tight or we have some air bubbles in the system, changing the resistance to the motor. The next value over is our pH 0. That is our pH offset. That value is calibrated when doing a single point pH calibration or when doing a 7 buffer calibration. We expect to see that value to be 0 plus or minus 20, and the acceptable range for that value is 0 plus or minus 40. You won't see anything outside of that because if we try to write to the value of 40, you're going to get an error 16, and that's going to tell us that we got a bad pH offset, and you might have a bad probe or just did a pH calibration that was not representative. The next value over is our pH slope. Our default pH slope is 59.2, and a calibrated slope will be that value plus or minus approximately 20. That value is calibrated when doing 10 buffer calibrations, and that is part of our pH 2-point buffer cal. This next one down is our error code line. We have 5 errors available of being shown. The first error is what is that active error. The second one is our secondary error if we have multiple error codes thrown at the same time. And then these other 3 are going to tell us basically if we had an error in previous cycles. The number all the way here at the bottom next to the VM, that is version measurement. That's what firmware version the sensor itself is running. This sensor right here is running version 2000 DRC7. The D stands for drinking water, RC stands for release candidate, and the 7 is something that we use internally for which version. The VD is version display. That's the firmware that is actively on this display PCB. The version is 326. These are our current production firmware versions for drinking water, and this is the current display firmware version for all displays, whether it's in the ballast water space, municipal space, whether it's a controller or a display. If we hit the down arrow again, we're going to get to an additional diagnostics and measurement window. This is what we call the down arrow screen 2. This top value here is the pH sensor A to D. That's our raw pH sensor value in millivolts. This is a good diagnostic value to determine whether or not your pH is functioning correctly if you have a sensor that has a pH sensor. I expect in around 8 pH that we would be seeing around negative 70 or so millivolts. For some reference, in 7 buffer, the pH millivolts, theoretical millivolts at 25 degrees Celsius should be 0 millivolts plus or minus 20 millivolts. And in 10 buffer, the millivolts should be negative 180 millivolts plus or minus 10 millivolts. That's another good diagnostic tool for troubleshooting and determining our sensor function. The pH sensor reference A to D, this is just the solid state reference within that pH sensor that we use as the reference point for our ampimetric chlorine sensor. The third line down is our sensor serial number. If you have the sensor installed in a location that's hard to get to or you have a really long cable, this is a really valuable way of determining what the serial number of that sensor is. And that's important for us to be able to give you any other diagnostic help, determine the age of the sensor. And you can see here 1123. Our serial number nomenclature is a date code. So 23 is the year that it was produced. 26 is the fiscal week of 2023 that the sensor was produced, and 189 is the number sensor produced that fiscal week. And then the very last line here is the number of operating hours that this sensor's been run. This one shows 165 hours. So that is a quick review of some of the measurement parameters offered by the display to help get a better idea of what your sensor is doing. If you guys have any questions or concerns, please reach out to tech@halogensys.com and we'll get back to you as soon as we can.